You're listening to the Doctor Is In podcast. This is the show where you get the best tips, tricks, and nutritional hacks to help you and your family get healthier. You'll also hear what works and what doesn't work so you don't have to waste your time and money. All right, let's get started.
Hello, I'm Dr. Martin Jr.
And I'm Dr. Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctor Is In podcast, and this is episode 116. And what we want to do on this episode is we want to talk about Candida. That's a big problem. We'll get into that in just a few minutes. But first, we want to talk about a study. It was a mouse study, but we found it very interesting. And then it'll kind of lead into our discussion on Candida. And the study was done on, for example, canola oil. It's amazing. As time's going on and the more reading and the more studies that are coming out, we're starting to understand how bad these vegetable oils are for every aspect of our health.
Yeah.
I mean, these omega-6, these types of omega-6 fatty acids, right? Because vegetable oils are very high in omega-6 fatty acids, and they're crappy. They're
highly industrialized.
There's nothing natural about them in any way. And it's amazing the amount of health effects that they're causing. But this study was done on canola oils, and what they found was it caused weight gain. And that's an interesting thing in itself, right? The effect that these processed vegetable oils have on body weight, but it increased weight. It reduced working memory. It created more amyloid plaques in the brain, suggesting a link to Alzheimer's. Very interesting, right? Because, one of the stories that kind of made, some headlines not too long ago was how dementia became the number one killer in Britain.
Isn't that incredible?
It's overtaken heart disease as the number one killer, right? So we have a definite brain epidemic going on. And there are a lot of things that attack the brain. Insulin resistance will shrink your brain. It'll make you diabetic of your brain, which will cause a whole bunch of stuff, including Alzheimer's. You got vegetable oils that seem to increase the amyloid plaques.
Yeah, they create inflammation in the body.
Cause the gut, right? And that's what we're going to kind of talk about here. So one of the things that
it attacks, right,
that we know that it attacks is the gut lining, right? So there are a lot of things that can attack the gut lining that we come into contact with, right? High stress. There was a great study, and we're talking about it in our course that we're building out, the Leaky Gut course, but there's a great study showing that high stress can have the same effect on your gut microbiome as a bad diet. So stress, I mean, you think about the gut, right? The gut is the second brain, and, stress has a huge impact on the health of your gut. Cortisol can rip apart your digestive tract, right?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things that can destroy your gut lining. Vegetable oils, definitely one of them. Stress is another one. All those chemicals and all the food allergies and all those things. But anyways, they lead to leaky gut, right? Which is, again, if you're new to our podcast, leaky gut is a great term because it describes exactly what's going on. I love it in medicine when they just kind of name something properly rather than trying to act all smart.
Instead of giving a Latin name to it that, nobody understands.
No,
right?
And that's the thing, right? I mean, you got to know Latin a lot of times, right? Which when you study anatomy, you do study a fair amount of Latin, and, it kind of makes sense to you when they use different words. However, a lot of that was done to kind of create a gap, right, between, medicine and
the
layperson in a sense, right? It creates this gap. They start naming muscles, like the sartorius muscle and all these things. And anyways, that's a little bit of
leaky gut is well named.
It's a great name because the gut is leaking. And of course, where is it leaking to? Right? The contents of the gut are leaking into your blood vessels.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, it's causing a whole bunch of problems, right? We've used this term for years, and I think we were the first people to use this term I'm hearing it more often now. We've been saying this for years. Leaky gut, leaky brain, which we're starting to understand is very much a big problem. Case in point, they found, and this is what we're going to talk about today, they found fungus in the brains of people with Parkinson's. How does it get there?
Yeah, exactly. Leaky gut.
Leaky gut, right? Yeah. So let's talk about Candida. Let's talk about fungus. So first of all, it gets into your gut. It gets into your system because of a leaky gut issue. That's how it gets there, right? Yeah. You get asked a lot about Candida, a lot about yeast.
Well, because we see it so much, right? It's very, very common, part of our finding in the biomarker testing, right? So when we're looking at blood should be pristine, it's a river, right? Think of your blood as an unpolluted river that flows from your brain to your toes and through 180,000 miles of blood vessels. It should be pristine. There should be no pollution in your river. And so what toxifies the brain is, what's in that blood, right? If it's circulating in your blood, Candida albicans is usually the one that we see, but Candida is very, very common. People don't even realize they have it. And it can create havoc in the body because it's a fungus. It creates a low-grade fungal infection. Your body sees it strictly as a foreign invader. It's never normal. It can be caused by, like you say, these vegetable oils.
There's a lot of way that it can get into your system.
It can. You take an antibiotic for 5 days, you kill all the friendly bacteria in your gut.
Did you see that study that, just as we're talking quickly about antibiotics, where it could take up to a year to repopulate your gut microbiome properly after a course of antibiotics? Again, one of the reasons why you start to see a lot of the side effects, in a sense, of antibiotic use is because, some people will take probiotics after, they should be taking them during as well, but they don't take them for long enough after. They just do not. If it could take up to a year to repopulate that gut, right? So, so it's not uncommon that somebody early in the year had some kind of an issue. They took antibiotics, and 10 months later they got symptoms of Candida. So let's talk about some of the more common symptoms that come in, because Candida is one of those things that, unless you got some obvious ones like, a urinary tract infection or nails, a lot of
toenail fungus, right?
A lot of the symptoms can mimic other things. It's not, you don't necessarily point right away and say, well, that's a Candida issue, right? There could be a little bit of the fog of war in a sense. Like there could be a lot of different little overlaps to some other conditions. So sometimes it's not that obvious. So let's talk about some of the common symptoms that present when somebody has a Candida issue, and men or women.
Yeah. Well, generally, not always, but generally they'll have some digestive issues like bloating, right? That's very, very common. Bloating, sometimes, if you look at the largest organ in the body, your skin, I've never seen a case of eczema or psoriasis.
Hives, rashes.
Can be, almost invariably will be Candida. A lot of times with just that mucus, that chronic sinusitis, they often think, I've got, an allergy. And maybe allergies aggravate, but a lot of times it's a chronic Candida fungus that's been set up in the sinuses. The Candida loves moisture. That's why women will get a yeast infection, right, in their reproductive organs. But a lot of people have chronic sinusitis, and it's a yeast that is set up, after use of an antibiotic, or, and the problem with constantly using antihistamines is you're actually killing your friendly bacteria with the antihistamines, and again, they act somewhat like an antibiotic.
Yeah, because a lot of times it's kind of, as you start to take an antihistamine, you start to need an antihistamine even more, right, because your natural defenses. Now, what about energy? Is that something that you see?
Yeah, for sure. Usually you're sluggish, don't feel as good. Energy is common. Brain fog we often see as a sign of that the brain is being invaded with Candida albicans.
And I find this one interesting because this is something that as well that, we see a fair amount. And we already know that it can affect the moods. It can affect, it can make anxiety worse, depression worse. As I mentioned, there was that study that they found fungus Candida in the brain of people, a big percentage of people with Parkinson's, right?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Neurological problems, right? Starts to set in the brain tissue. There was a doctor, Italian oncologist, I remember, Sinusitis, I think is his name. And I remember this years and years ago. He talked about every cancer was Candida, was fungus-based. Every cancer, because when he was an oncologist, and whenever he had a biopsy of cancer cells, he'd always see the milky, whitish.
You wonder if that's kind of like, not that Candida causes cancer, but just that usually if somebody has cancer, their immune system is compromised. They always have leaky gut. They always have. So it's kind of one of those things that kind of comes with it, which can cause a lot of those other symptoms as well, right? And that's the thing. A lot of times these doctors or researchers, they find a piece of the puzzle. And a lot of times they'll get laughed at in a sense, because I do remember that they were attributing cancer to Candida. And it's one of those things where I don't think he was that far off. I think it makes sense that you would see a lot of Candida in people with cancer, especially if they're going through all that radiation and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. It's not surprising to see that. It makes sense. And can it cause some cancer to some people? Yeah, I mean, digestively, sure. I mean, why not, right? But again, it makes for an interesting discussion anyways. So you have, you have those kind of, we talked about, obviously, urinary tract infections in females.
And that's a lot of thing, too. And I see this, of course, in the office every day. That, and it's usually women. They'll have a recurring urinary tract infection. Well, a couple of things are happening. One of them, I say, listen, if you're not getting a lot of burning, maybe the smell, you can smell the urine, you have an infection, but you're not getting, it's not severe burning. I usually tell them it's not E. coli. It's not the bacteria. The bacteria might be sitting, and you find it in the urine, and your nitrates are going up. But what I tell them is you have an underlying yeast infection in that bladder, and what happens, that yeast sits on the wall, and now the bacteria sits on top of it. But now you take an antibiotic, it kills it, symptoms go away, comes back, and recurs and recurs and recurs. So I always tell them, look, you better take a broad-spectrum probiotic, get rid of the yeast that is sitting in the bladder, and then you will you'll break the chain of those recurring urinary tract infections.
And I guess we got to talk also about one of the other real common things that happens is a strong craving for sugar or sweets.
Oh, yeah. You want to do a swan dive whenever you see a chocolate or sugar, and, just because Candida needs sugar, right, to survive.
And, this is something, there's a lot of variations of a Candida diet out there. And one of the issues that we have with that, in a sense, is so you can cut out all sugar, you can, cut out all the white stuff, go on a real Candida-based diet, and you're going to feel a lot better. But in our opinion, that's part of the equation.
That's certainly not all of it.
No, and a lot of times people get frustrated because they go on this Candida diet and they do feel better, but when they get off it, they have the same symptoms, and it makes sense because, you're not repairing the problem, right? That's part of the problem. You're reducing the stuff that the Candida needs to survive, so that's helping it. But the underlying problem, again, we say this all the time, it's cause and effect. Candida is the effect. Something caused or allowed that Candida to take place in the first, We're not built to have that really allowed to happen. So the fact that it has taken over, what's the cause? So you can starve it out, but the underlying issue is usually there a lot of times. Some people, they can starve it out and they get better and they don't have any more issues again. But one of the common things that we hear, a lot of emails we get are, hey, I did the Candida diet and I'm still getting, because the underlying issue that started it has not been fixed. So you got to actually repair. So sugar cravings and all that, you got to get off sugar. You got to do all those things. However, if you don't actually repair the gut, and that's the key, right? You have to repair the gut lining to fix the problem so that your digestive system, the way it's meant to work, can handle that, can take care of the problem, right? So let's talk about, for a few minutes, about actually repairing the lining of the gut. There's a lot of things that a person can do for that. One of the main issues is chronic inflammation of that gut lining, right? So you got an inflammatory issue, but then you also have a gut lining issue where the holes have gotten bigger, right? It's leaking in. So you got to fix the gut lining. So there's a few things how do you recommend to somebody repair that gut lining?
Well, obviously, the number one thing is the broad spectrum probiotic. You need to take friendly bacteria. You don't need billions of them. You need trillions of them. You need trillions of bacteria. We have more bacteria in our body than we have cells. And the vast
it's almost
majority,
like 10 to 1.
Yeah.
It's crazy when you think about that,
and
right?
the vast majority are found in your gut. And, they say disease starts in the gut. Somebody said that, I think, I don't know when it was. I mean, it was, if not hundreds of years ago. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The fact is they were right on. I mean, a lot of disease starts in that gut. So you want to replace the bacteria. You have to get the border guards in there. You have to seal the wall. Probiotics. I love the healing factors in L-glutamine.
Well, just to kind of, that was Hippocrates who said that, and that was like 2,000 years ago.
What's Hippocrates?
2,000.
I knew it was somewhere. I just couldn't remember.
Yeah,
that's
actually that guy was way ahead.
2,000 years ago. He was pretty sharp.
Yeah, he was way ahead of the game on that one, right? But anyway, sorry to cut you off. It's just that I was kind of like a string pulling in my brain there, so that was Hippocrates. But anyways, yeah, so you got to repair the gut, probiotics.
The father of medicine.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing, right? Now, the funny thing is if the beginning point for a lot of diseases in the gut, it makes sense if you go to a neurologist and he also talked about gut health, but that never happens, right? It makes sense if you go to a joint specialist that they also inquire about the health of your gut. That never happens. Makes sense if you go to a dermatologist, big time, about acne or psoriasis, eczema. It only makes sense that they inquire about the health of your gut. That never happens.
Cardiologist?
That's what I'm saying, right? That's why it can be so frustrating. It could be frustrating sometimes because the answer could be very simply the health of their gut, right? So here, 2,000 plus years ago,
And I don't have to talk, because we have talked about this in the past, and you were talking about brain. Think of autism. What's autism? What is all the issues we're seeing with children today with focus and ADD and ADHD? There's a huge connection, in my opinion, with autistic kids and their gut and, coming right out of mommy and the placenta and all the issues.
Yeah, it makes for some really interesting discussions. I remember we talked about autism. Can't remember how many episodes back. It's been a while, so maybe we'll do another one of those as well because we get a lot of questions about that as well. So let's get back quickly to healing the gut. You talk about probiotics is probably step number one, right? That's number one.
Bone broth, I love it.
Yeah, and there's a few reasons why bone broth protein is tremendous for leaky gut, right? One, it's naturally loaded with L-glutamine.
Which regenerates the gut.
Yeah, rapidly dividing cells need L-glutamine for energy. The cells of your digestive tract require L-glutamine, right? So if you want to improve the health, heal that gut lining, then L-glutamine is tremendous for that. And bone broth protein is a very easy to digest, even for people with a lot of allergies. Case in point, your wife, my mom, can tolerate bone broth, and it's got a lot of L-glutamine, so it's very good for that. So those are, two basic things right there. Also, we're big fans of digestive enzymes, breaking down that food properly.
Before it gets to the gut.
Yeah, and a lot of times, as we age, a percentage of our enzymes decreases every year. We'll do a show on that after. But
we love our mucilages too, right?
Yeah, that's right. Those are also good, right? We have a formula called IBS formula.
Slippery
elm bark, marshmallow root extract. They coat, they heal. Yeah. So absolutely, but definitely. So somebody comes in to see you and you find out it's Candida. you tell them probiotics,
usually bone broth.
bone broth protein.
Yep. And cut their sugars out of their diet. They're going low carb. The white flour, anything that turns to sugar in 5 seconds, is going to get in and feed that Candida. Which we get them to not to feed the bears. That's what I tell my patients. Don't feed I show them the yeast in their blood, and I say, don't feed them. Don't feed those things because they want to eat. They'll call your name every day. I want sugar, sugar, sugar. Well, don't feed the bears.
And what kind of timeline? It's hard to say because, some people could be really bad, really overloaded, a lot of symptoms. But generally, what kind of...
Well, about 3 weeks. I always say about 21 days, you're usually going to see an enormous difference in the amount of Candida albicans that is there. The leaky gut starts healing up big time. If you've been on antibiotics for a lot of times in your lifetime, then you need to really stay the course, because if you got Candida in your bloodstream,
and that could be a real battle.
Loves moisture. It'll love your brain. It'll love your sinuses. It'll love your lung tissue. Ladies, it will love your urinary tract and your reproductive organs. It's moisture. They are the cousin of mold, and they love moisture, and they'll set up shop. And a lot of people have chronic issues because of that. So you got to stick to it.
It
Give
really
it
is a
time.
big issue.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is a common big issue that you encounter every day. So, anyways, so we hope that answers your questions on Candida. If you have other ones, feel free to email us at info@martinclinic.com. If you're not a newsletter subscriber, then you're missing out. You hate to brag, but those newsletters are good.
Yeah.
We give a lot of information, a lot of tips. So if you're not a newsletter subscriber, head over to martinclinic.com and sign up for our free newsletters. And if you're listening to us on iTunes, we would appreciate just leave a quick review. And you can also subscribe to us on iTunes as well, so that every time we release a new episode, you get a nice little notification.
I do.
Yeah, so do I. I love, I subscribe to our own new podcast. And it's actually funny. I'll listen to our own podcast after, right? I'll listen to it, and I got family that listens to it. And my wife will drive around town, and I'll hear my voice on the radio as she pulls in. And it's a funny thing, right? And a lot of times, too, when we go into the clinic, somebody will hear us talking, and they'll recognize the voice from the podcast, right? So, I mean, but anyways, if you can subscribe right on the app, you can subscribe to us. But again, we do want to thank you for listening, and have a great day.